She was laughed at on her wedding day, but God turned her tears into a testimony. There are moments when laughter doesn't sound like joy. It sounds like mockery, when every whisper feels like a knife, and every eye in the room becomes a mirror you don't want to face. Elena stood at the altar that day, trembling in her white dress while the town she grew up in watched her fall apart. Again. They said no woman should forgive what he did. They said she was desperate, foolish, blinded by faith, and yet she looked up, her eyes filled not with pride but with peace. The kind that only comes when you decide to let God defend your story, because this wasn't just a wedding. It was redemption unfolding in real time. Every cruel laugh, every rumor, every judgment whispered behind folded programs. God would turn it into the very testimony that would silence them all. What they didn't know was that the man who once broke her, the man they came to see fail, was about to prove that grace can rebuild what pride destroyed. And what started as humiliation would become the most powerful love story this town had ever witnessed. Stay until the end, because you're about to see how God takes the ugliest moment of someone's life and turns it into the very reason others start believing again. The morning sun rose shyly over Willow Creek, as if unsure whether to bless or to witness. Elena stood before her small mirror, pinning the last strand of hair into place, her hands trembling in rhythm with her heart. The lace dress she'd sewn herself shimmered softly in the quiet room. Outside, the church bell rang once, low and hesitant, like even heaven was afraid of what the day might hold. In that stillness, she whispered, "God, let me make it to the end of the aisle." She wasn't asking for joy, only the strength not to fall apart in front of them. The same them who once promised to celebrate love but had come to watch a story they thought they already knew. Her phone buzzed on the table. A new message. A picture. Her from years ago, standing alone at the altar, abandoned, humiliated. The caption read, "Round 2," followed by laughing emojis. The sound that escaped her lips wasn't a sob. It was a prayer trying to find air. She pressed the screen face down and drew a trembling breath that didn't feel like mercy yet. "Not again," she whispered, though her voice had no audience but God. And somewhere beyond the clouds, silence answered, not cruel, just mysterious. Across town, Jack stared at his reflection in the old barber mirror, fixing the same tie he'd worn on the day he ran. Back then, pride was perfume. Now regret was cologne. He'd spent 3 years trying to outrun the moment he broke her, and 3 years learning that peace doesn't live in distance. He wasn't sure if the town would ever forgive him, but he hoped she might believe his repentance before the world doubted it. "God," he murmured, gripping the counter, "I don't deserve her, but let me deserve this moment." The mirror didn't blink. Neither did grace. He left without checking if his hair was right. Humility has better priorities. The church stood at the top of Maple Street, its white paint peeling in confession. Women in pastel dresses fluttered like anxious butterflies at the entrance. Children giggled, men checked their watches, and someone whispered, "She really came back." Elena stepped from the car, veil brushing her cheek like a whisper from heaven. Her steps were steady, but her stomach wasn't. It's strange how courage can borrow the body of fear and still walk straight. Every laugh outside echoed louder inside her chest. Inside, candles flickered unevenly, as if nervous for her too. A murmur rolled across the pews, a mix of gossip and disbelief. "After what he did?" one woman whispered. "She must be desperate," said another. But Pastor Miriam stood near the altar, eyes calm, hands folded as if guarding the flame of something invisible. Elena saw her and remembered the words the pastor once told her. "Don't wait for everyone to believe in you. Just make sure you believe in God." She took her first step down the aisle. Every creak of the wooden floor sounded like a testimony. She could feel eyes tracing every inch of her, not admiration but examination. At the front, Jack stood still, his hands clasped, his throat tight with the weight of all the apologies the world hadn't heard yet. He didn't blink. He couldn't. The moment was both punishment and redemption, meeting halfway between shame and grace. And though no one knew it yet, heaven was holding its breath. Some miracles begin where dignity refuses to die. Halfway down the aisle, she saw a teenage girl smirking, showing her phone to a friend. The screen glowed in the same old video. For a second, Elena's vision blurred. Laughter felt louder than the organ. But then she remembered something her grandmother used to say. "Child, the devil laughs first, but God laughs last." and his laughter heals. She lifted her chin, not in pride, but in peace. And the next step she took was heavier, but holier. Jack saw it too. The glow of the phone, the tilt of her shoulders, the battle no one else noticed. He wanted to run down the aisle, to shield her from all of it, to shout, "This is my fault." But Grace whispered, "Let her strength be seen." Then join it, so he stayed. Every second felt like judgment, but maybe judgment was the soil where truth grows. He closed his eyes, breathing through the ache that comes before healing. The cross behind him looked heavier than ever, and he was finally ready to carry it. When Elena reached the altar, Pastor Miriam's eyes glistened with quiet understanding. "Take each other's hands," she said gently, voice steady but tender. The moment their fingers touched, something shifted, not magic but mercy finding form. Jack's hand was cold, trembling, human. Elena's was warm, trembling, faithful. Together they made a kind of balance the town had forgotten existed. Whispers stopped. Even the air decided to listen. Jack's voice cracked before it even began. "I don't have perfect words," he said softly, "but I have truth." A ripple of discomfort ran through the crowd. Truth always rearranges furniture. "I hurt you, Elena. I humiliated you, and no apology can fix what pride destroyed." He swallowed hard, eyes glistening but unashamed. "But I came back not because I'm worthy, but because Grace wouldn't let me stay gone." And for the first time in years, she saw tears he didn't hide. A faint sob broke from the back pew, where Mrs. Talbot, the town's harshest critic, suddenly covered her mouth. Elena blinked slowly, letting the tears she'd fought so hard finally fall. It didn't feel like weakness, it felt like release. When she spoke, her voice carried no bitterness, only truth softened by time. "I waited for you to come back, not because I couldn't move on, but because God told me there was still something to rebuild." A hush settled deeper than silence. Even the candles stopped flickering. "I forgive you," she said, and the words felt like a key unlocking more than his heart. They unlocked the room. Whispers turned into quiet sniffles. Judgment melted into awe. Forgiveness isn't applause. It's freedom disguised as surrender. Jack nodded, his lips trembling with a gratitude too sacred for words. Behind them, the cross caught the last ray of sunlight through the window. And in that light, the church no longer looked old. It looked reborn. They exchanged rings. Simple, modest, nothing Instagram would envy. But the way they looked at each other made heaven lean closer. Pastor Miriam smiled, her hands trembling as she declared, "What grace has joined, let no pride divide." The words echoed differently this time, not as tradition, but as prophecy. Jack exhaled a breath he didn't know he'd been holding for 3 years. Elena smiled softly, and for the first time her smile didn't have to prove anything. It just existed, whole, unashamed, and seen. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying laughter away like leaves after a storm. No one recorded this part. The phone stayed down. The town that came for gossip witnessed redemption instead, and when the bell rang again, its sound was different, not warning but worship. People looked at each other, unsure how to explain what they'd felt. Sometimes God preaches louder through broken people than through perfect sermons, and Willow Creek for once was listening. After the ceremony, Elena stepped outside with the veil still on. The air smelled of rain and something like peace. Jack followed, carrying nothing but a small bouquet left behind on the pew. No photographers, no applause. Just quiet, raw grace breathing between them. He whispered, "Thank you for believing I could change." She smiled gently. "I didn't believe in you. I believed in what God could still do." That difference was everything. Aunt Nora handed her a cup of water, tears shining under her fake eyelashes. "I didn't think you'd go through with it," she confessed. Elena laughed softly. "Neither did I." Behind them, Pastor Miriam spoke to a group of women still wiping their eyes. "The miracle wasn't that he came back," she said. "It's that she let hope in again. Hope, the quiet survivor no gossip can bury. And that's how testimonies begin, in whispers, not trumpets." Jack looked around the churchyard. Same faces, new hearts. He spotted the teenage girl again, this time holding her phone differently. Not filming, deleting. He caught her eye. She blushed, then nodded like someone who'd learned what shame feels like when it meets grace. He didn't speak, didn't need to. The lesson had already been preached. Sometimes the loudest repentance isn't shouted, it's shown. The sky finally opened, releasing soft rain that fell like applause from heaven. Elena tilted her head back, laughing through the drops. Jack covered her shoulders with his jacket. Not as a hero, but as a man learning care. They stood there soaked and smiling, the church bell ringing one last time. Behind them, the town began to disperse and quieter, gentler. Humiliation had turned into a hymn, and the first verse was forgiveness. That night, Elena placed her dress on the chair beside her bed. She ran her fingers over the lace, whispering, "You did your job." The veil hung like a memory redeemed. Jack sat on the edge of the bed, silent, humbled by peace. He wasn't the same man who'd left her crying at that altar, and she wasn't the same woman who had begged him to stay. They had both been broken, and that's exactly why God could use them. When they finally knelt together, the house was quiet, but heaven was loud. "Thank you," Elena whispered, her tears now holy water, "for making what hurt most heal deepest." Jack's voice joined hers, cracked but honest. "Teach me how to love with mercy, not ego." The wind outside pressed gently against the window as if agreeing. Some prayers don't need thunder, they just need truth. And that night, Willow Creek slept under a softer sky. 3 days after the wedding, the bakery on Main Street smelled of cinnamon and whispers. Elena had returned to work, apron tied tight, pretending the flour on her hands was armor. Customers smiled too sweetly, their eyes carrying unspoken headlines. "Did you hear how he cried?" One voice murmured near the counter. Another added, "I give it 6 months." She kept kneading dough like forgiveness and pressing out air, shaping silence. Faith, she thought, was easier in church than in checkout lines. At the hardware store, Jack wiped dust from the counter, trying not to overhear the same melody of gossip. Men leaned on shelves, talking about him like a ghost who still haunted his own mistakes. "Heard he's trying to play husband of the year," one said. "People don't change that fast," another replied. Jack smiled faintly, not defensive, just tired. Redemption isn't a sprint. It's rebuilding a house with your bare hands while people watch to see if it collapses again. And he intended to build anyway. That afternoon, Elena walked home under a sky too blue to match her mood. Every storefront felt like a stage, every glance a review. But halfway down Maple Street, Mrs. Talbot, the same woman who once mocked her, waved. "Your bread sold out again, dear," she said with a trembling smile. It wasn't an apology, but it was something holy in disguise. Grace sometimes begins as a rumor in the opposite direction. Elena thanked her, heart lighter than her steps. At home, Jack was fixing the porch railing that had been loose for years. Each nail he drove in felt like penance with purpose. Elena watched from the doorway, remembering the man who once couldn't finish anything he started. Now he worked quietly, no speeches, no grand gestures. "Looks good," she said softly. He wiped sweat from his brow and smiled. Still learning to hold things steady. The sentence wasn't about the railing, and they both knew it. Evenings became a kind of sanctuary. They would sit on the back steps drinking lemonade, listening to crickets sermonize about persistence. Sometimes they didn't talk. They just existed in the same peace they used to chase separately. One night, Jack whispered, "Do you think people will ever forget?" Elena leaned her head on his shoulder. "Maybe not, but maybe they'll remember what came after more." The stars above blinked, old witnesses to new beginnings, and for a moment, silence felt safe again. Sunday arrived like a test. Their first church service as husband and wife. Same building, same stairs, different story. When they entered, a hush spread through the pews like wind before rain. Elena's fingers tightened around his arm, not in fear, but in prayer. Pastor Miriam smiled from the pulpit, eyes knowing. "We don't need a new sermon today," she began. "We just need to keep living the last one." The room exhaled, some in agreement, others in discomfort. After the service, an older man approached Jack near the steps. "You embarrassed your family, son," he said, voice stern but trembling. Jack nodded, accepting what he couldn't rewrite. "Yes, sir." The man studied him, eyes softening. "Then make them proud by staying." Jack shook his hand, the simple gesture sealing a silent truce between past and future. Some forgiveness comes in plain clothes, and Jack was learning to recognize it. That afternoon, Elena visited the small community center behind the church. Children ran through the yard chasing bubbles like promises. The old playground still leaned to one side, the paint chipped, swings creaking with forgotten laughter. She looked around and felt a stirring she hadn't felt in years. Purpose. She remembered her father saying, Fix what's broken where no one else looks. Maybe this was where their healing would take root. A place where mercy could have walls. She shared the idea with Jack over dinner, rebuilding the center, teaching kids to bake, offering free meals on Fridays. He listened quietly, fork paused midair. "That's beautiful," he said. "We can start next week," Elena smiled. "We?" He nodded. "You fixed my heart. Let me fix the walls." It wasn't romantic. It was real. Love, it turns out, builds faster when both carry tools. Word spread as words do in Willow Creek, but this time differently. "Did you hear what they're doing with the old center?" About time someone did. Even skeptics couldn't resist curiosity. On the first Saturday, a dozen volunteers showed up, some holding hammers, others casseroles. One teenager, the same who once filmed the wedding, came carrying paint cans. Her shirt read, "Grace Rebuilds." The walls came alive with color, soft blues, warm yellows, and laughter that no longer cut. Jack sanded wood until his hands blistered. Elena painted window frames while singing softly. Children watched in awe as the town's two most talked about names worked side by side. Every brushstroke erased a little more of yesterday's shame. The building started to smell like hope and vanilla. And for the first time in a long time, gossip had nothing to feed on. Just gratitude. Late one afternoon, Pastor Miriam stopped by, wiping sweat from her forehead. "This place feels different," she said. Elena smiled, setting down her brush. "It's not the paint, it's the peace." The pastor nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe peace is the color we've been missing all along." She looked at Jack, who was repairing a door hinge with quiet determination. "He's a different man now," Elena whispered. "No," the pastor corrected gently. "He's a man finally at peace with who he is." The following week, a reporter from the local paper showed up. He'd come expecting a redemption headline, something to sell. But when he saw the laughter, the children, and the smell of bread drifting through the open doors, he lowered his camera. "This isn't a story," he murmured. "It's a sermon?" Elena handed him a loaf anyway. "Then preach it kindly." The article the next day read, "Grace Rebuilds More Than Walls." And for once, the town shared a headline worth believing. Still, not everyone was kind. A woman at the grocery store whispered loud enough for Elena to hear, "Let's see how long this act lasts." Elena turned, smiled softly, and said, "I hope long enough to help someone else believe they can change too." The woman blinked, disarmed by kindness sharper than any retort. Some battles are won with gentleness that feels like strength in disguise. Elena walked away lighter, her faith a quiet flame no gossip could snuff out. And the whisper behind her turned into silence. One evening, Jack found Elena sitting by the porch, her Bible open but unread. "You okay?" he asked, sitting beside her. She nodded, eyes glassy. "It's strange. I prayed for a miracle and it came, but it still hurts sometimes." Jack took her hand. "Maybe healing doesn't mean it stops hurting. Maybe it just means we stop bleeding." The words hung between them like lanterns. The pain was still real, but now it had purpose. And purpose always outlives shame. Days turned into weeks and the community center grew busier. Mothers came for bread. Fathers helped with repairs. Children drew crosses on the sidewalks with chalk. Someone started calling it the Haven, and the name stuck. Elena wrote it on a wooden sign herself, carving each letter with care. "This place," she told Jack, "is what forgiveness looks like when it grows legs." He kissed her forehead, smiling. "And I'll keep it standing." The wind carried the smell of baked bread and new beginnings. But peace, as always, comes with tests. One afternoon, a stranger in a suit arrived, the bank's representative. He explained the building's previous debts and hinted that the Haven might not stay open long. Jack's face hardened. Old fears flickered. Elena reached for his hand. "Let's not panic. We'll pray and work." She smiled faintly. God didn't rebuild this just to watch it fall. The man left, promising to return in 2 weeks. That night, they gathered volunteers and told them the truth. No sugarcoating, no false hope. But instead of fear, the room filled with resolve. Mr. Dorsey offered to donate lumber. Mrs. Talbot promised to bake every weekend. The teenagers pledged to host a fundraiser. For the first time, the town wasn't divided between mockers and believers. They were builders. Elena felt tears rise again, but this time they didn't sting. They watered something sacred. As the sun set behind the old sycamore trees, Jack placed his arm around her shoulders. "Do you realize what's happening?" he asked softly. She looked around. At the laughter, the teamwork, the grace breathing through the air. "This town is healing," she whispered. "Not just us." He nodded, eyes bright. "Maybe that's what God was after all along." The bell from St. Augustine rang in the distance, this time not for a wedding, but for resurrection. And heaven smiled. Later that night, as rain began to fall softly, they stood by the window holding hands. Outside, the sign "The Haven" glowed under the porch light. Elena whispered, "Do you ever think about that day and the laughter, the shame?" Jack exhaled slowly. "Every day, but now, I remember it differently." "How?" she asked. He smiled. It was the sound before the song. And with that, the thunder rolled gently, not to scare, but to remind them. Even storms can sound like grace. 2 weeks passed too quickly, and the letter from the bank arrived like a storm sealed in paper. Elena stood by the window holding it, the sunlight cutting through the room like a question. Jack read it twice, his jaw tightening. Outstanding balance. Immediate resolution required. The words felt cold, final, like grace had an expiration date. "This can't be right," Elena whispered. But even as she said it, a chill told her the test they feared had finally come. They sat at the table in silence, the envelope between them like a third presence. Jack rubbed his temples. "I should have checked the old contract sooner." Elena looked at him, calm but steady. "No, we did what we could with what we had. God knew the timing." He wanted to believe her, but the old voice returned, the one that whispered he was never enough. Failure had a familiar accent. Elena reached across the table and touched his hand. "We'll face this together." Faith once again would require more than words. That night they called a town meeting at the Haven. The rain poured, thunder rolling like a preacher with bad timing. But still, people came. Umbrellas dripping, faces anxious but willing. Jack stood in front, heart pounding as he explained the debt. For a moment, silence fell heavy, thick as humidity. Then a small voice broke it. "I'm a boy no older than 10. My mom said God doesn't start stories he won't finish." Laughter rippled softly through the room, breaking tension like sunlight through clouds. Mrs. Talbot stood up next. "We've all been part of this. We're not letting it go." Mr. Dorsey nodded. "I've got spare wood and more time than sense. Count me in." A chorus of agreement followed. Louder, braver, real. Elena felt tears rise, this time not from fear, but from awe. What started as gossip had become a congregation. And somewhere above the thunder, heaven whispered, "Keep building." Over the next few days, the Haven buzzed with effort. Teens baked cookies to sell on corners. Old farmers brought fruit for jams, and local artists donated paintings. Every dollar raised was small, but every heart that joined felt huge. Still, the numbers didn't add up fast enough. Jack stared at the ledger one night, the ink looking darker than hope. He whispered, "What if we lose it anyway?" And the silence afterward felt too familiar. Elena came behind him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. "We might," she said softly. "But losing something built with faith isn't failure, and it's offering." Her words lingered like light in fog. Jack closed his eyes. "You really believe that, don't you?" She smiled faintly. "I have to. If I stop now, then the laughter wins." That line pierced him deeper than any bank notice ever could. He nodded, resolve forming where doubt had made a home. The next morning, a white car parked outside the Haven. A man in a crisp suit stepped out, umbrella perfectly angled. The bank's representative, Mr. Lowell. He scanned the site with polite detachment, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Carter," he said to Jack, "I assume you're aware of the remaining balance?" Jack nodded. "Yes, sir. We're working on it." The man's eyes flicked toward the half-painted wall and the group of children playing near it. "Well," he said dryly, "it's a charming effort, but charity rarely pays interest." Elena stepped forward, calm but fierce. "With all due respect, sir, this isn't charity. It's restoration." Mr. Lowell blinked, caught off guard by her tone. Jack watched, pride flickering behind his anxiety. She continued, "We're not asking for pity. We're showing proof that change can multiply." The banker looked at her for a long moment before closing his folder. "I'll give you one more week," he said. "But sentiment won't settle debt." After he left, Jack exhaled sharply. "1 week? That's nothing." Elena turned toward the volunteers. "Then we'll make 1 week look like a miracle." Her voice carried more conviction than volume. She wrote the phrase 1 week of grace on the whiteboard and circled it. Every eye in the room lifted. Every heart beat faster. Hope had a deadline now, and urgency became worship. Sometimes faith needs a countdown to show it's alive. Posters went up around town. Bake sale, car wash, auction for the haven. The whole place began to buzz like a beehive of belief. Even the skeptical radio host mentioned them on air. Apparently, Grace is up for fundraising this week. People laughed, but they came. Elena baked through the night. Jack fixed every broken hinge he could find. Sleep became optional, but purpose did not. On Friday, the community gathered for the auction. Homemade pies, old furniture, even a hand-carved cross Jack made from scrap wood. Everything found a buyer. By the end, the donation jar overflowed. Elena counted each bill carefully, hope trembling through her fingers. But when they finished, the total still fell short. By just $200, the room went quiet, hearts hanging in that fragile space between almost and not enough. Jack looked around, ready to thank everyone anyway, until the door creaked open. An elderly woman walked in, holding a tin box and a folded letter. Her name was Mrs. Green, the widow who rarely spoke to anyone. "I heard the bell," she said softly. "Figured maybe it was ringing for me." She placed the box on the table. Inside were old coins, small bills, and a note. For the children. From the husband who believed love deserves one more chance. It was exactly $200. For a moment, no one spoke. Then someone began to clap. Another joined. Soon the whole room was on its feet, applauding like the roof itself had performed a miracle. Jack covered his face, laughing through tears. Elena hugged Mrs. Green tightly, both women crying for different reasons that somehow meant the same thing. Grace, it turned out, had impeccable math. The next morning, Mr. Lowell returned. He checked the papers, double-counted the sum, and looked genuinely surprised. "You did it," he said simply. Jack nodded, smiling. "We didn't, the town did." For a moment, something softened in the banker's eyes. Curiosity, maybe envy. "I'll be honest," he said. "I didn't think you could." Elena answered gently. "That's why it's called faith, not forecasting." When the paperwork was signed, applause broke out again. The kids ran around shouting, "The haven is ours." Elena looked at Jack, her eyes shimmering. He exhaled, shoulders finally lowering after weeks of tension. "Guess God really does finish what he starts," he murmured. Elena smiled. "He doesn't just finish it, Jack, he multiplies it." And as if on cue, sunlight poured through the clouds. Later that day, while everyone cleaned up, Jack sat outside on the steps. His hands were blistered, but his heart was finally still. He thought about every time he'd run from difficulty, every excuse he'd made. Now staying, sweating, fighting, believing, felt better than any escape ever had. Elena came out with 2 glasses of lemonade. "Taste this," she said. "It's sour but somehow sweet," he smiled. "Like redemption." Evening fell, wrapping Willow Creek in gold. Children chased each other in the yard. Laughter filled the air that once held judgment. Elena stood by the door watching them, eyes misty. Jack joined her. "Remember how everyone used to laugh at us?" She nodded slowly. "Now they're laughing because of us." He squeezed her hand. Grace changes the soundtrack, and the night hummed like peace finally learning harmony. News of the miracle spread beyond town. Churches in nearby counties sent letters of support. Strangers donated online. A local TV reporter came expecting a cliché story, but left crying mid-interview. "This isn't just a center," she said on camera. "It's a reminder that small towns can still believe big." Elena smiled shyly when the piece aired. Jack teased her. "You're famous now," she laughed. "No, Grace is." That night they sat by the window, the lights of the haven glowing across the street. Jack turned to her. "I used to think success was having everything." She tilted her head. "And now?" He looked at her, I'm tired, grateful, in love. "Now I know success is having peace when everything could fall apart." Elena brushed his cheek gently. "That's what redemption sounds like." Outside the bell rang again, soft, steady, faithful. As they prayed before bed, the rain began again, the same gentle rain that had blessed their wedding day. Elena whispered, "We passed the test, didn't we?" Jack smiled, eyes closed. "Yes, but I think the real test was never about the money." She opened her eyes, curious. "Then what was it about?" He took her hand, whispering, "Whether we'd still believe when it didn't make sense." The thunder rolled softly, almost approving, and heaven once again stayed near. A year passed and Willow Creek no longer spoke about that wedding. Now people talked about the Haven, the place where miracles wore work boots. Children came for after-school lessons, single parents found help, and laughter replaced pity in the air. Elena had become Miss Elena to half the town's kids. Jack had become the man everyone called when something needed fixing. It wasn't fame, it was trust. And trust in a town that once loved gossip was the rarest miracle of all. One morning, Elena unlocked the bakery section inside the Haven and froze. On the counter sat a small basket wrapped in blue cloth. Inside was a note written in a child's uneven letters, "For you. Because you feed everyone else." Tears blurred her vision as she lifted a loaf of bread shaped like a heart. It was slightly burned, uneven, but beautiful, like grace itself. She laughed through the tears. "God, you really don't waste anything, do you?" Across town, Jack finished repairing the roof of an elderly couple's porch. He refused payment, only asking for one thing: "Pray for us." The man grinned. "Son, the whole town already does." Jack chuckled, wiping sweat from his forehead. A year ago, those same words would have sounded like mockery. Now they sounded like belonging. And belonging was the quietest kind of redemption. But peace, as always, has its interruptions. A new business opened, a large commercial bakery backed by investors from the city. They offered discounts, shiny ads, and faster service. Within a month, sales at the Haven Bakery dropped by half. Elena smiled in public but cried in private, whispering, "Lord, not again." Jack found her late one night in the kitchen, staring at unsold bread. He took her hand. Maybe this time the test is about trust and not survival. Instead of competing, they decided to give. Every morning, Elena baked extra loaves and left them in baskets on the steps of struggling families. Word spread, not about cheaper bread, but about love that didn't check price tags, and slowly people came back, not for convenience, but for compassion. The smell of hope returned to Willow Creek streets. And the big bakery? It stayed open, but its lights seemed dimmer. Because light isn't something you sell, it's something you carry. One afternoon, Pastor Miriam arrived with a box of old photographs. "Thought you'd want these," she said, smiling softly. Inside were pictures from their wedding, the one the world had mocked. Elena hesitated before picking one up. It showed her crying at the altar, mascara running, heart wide open. Jack touched the photo gently. "That's where everything began." Elena nodded, tears soft and clean. "And where everything dead started breathing again." That night, Jack sat by the window looking at the photo under lamplight. "Crazy," he murmured. A single moment of humiliation became a lifetime of purpose. Elena leaned against the frame. "That's what God does, turns ashes into addresses." He smiled. "You mean blessings?" She shook her head. "No, addresses. Because he doesn't just heal you, he gives you somewhere new to live." Jack laughed softly. "Then this house is holy ground." Outside, rain began to fall again, the familiar rhythm of remembrance. The next morning, the mayor stopped by the Haven. He looked around at the classrooms, the bakery, the laughter. "This place started as a story about scandal," he said. "Now it's the heart of our town." He handed them an envelope. Inside was an invitation to the annual Community Awards Gala. Jack frowned. "We don't need that kind of attention." Elena smiled, sensing something deeper. Maybe attention isn't always bad, and if it glorifies the right thing. They agreed to go. The night of the gala, Elena wore a simple blue dress and Jack his only good jacket. They sat near the back unnoticed and until the host began to speak. "This year's award for community impact goes to..." The pause felt eternal. "Elena and Jack Carter, founders of the Haven." The applause rose like thunder. And as they walked to the stage, Elena saw something in the crowd that made her breath catch. The same faces that once laughed. Mrs. Talbot, tears in her eyes. The teenager who'd filmed the wedding, clapping proudly. Even Mr. Lowell, the banker, nodding respectfully from the corner. Elena's throat tightened. Jack whispered, "You okay?" She nodded, smiling through tears. Just realizing God has a perfect sense of symmetry. What once humiliated her was now heaven's headline. On stage, the host handed them the plaque. Elena looked out at the crowd and felt a familiar tremor in her hands. But this time, the fear had turned into reverence. "I don't deserve this," she began, voice steady but tender. "This belongs to everyone who believed God could turn broken things into beautiful ones." Jack took the microphone next. his eyes shining. And to everyone still waiting for that miracle, don't leave before the ending. The audience stood, clapping as if each hand carried its own prayer. It wasn't about recognition anymore, it was revelation. Because everyone in that room knew they'd witnessed redemption with skin on. Even those who hadn't believed began to wonder if maybe grace was real after all. Elena saw faces softening, pride melting, stories rewriting themselves mid-heartbeat. Sometimes testimonies don't need pulpits. Sometimes they just need people brave enough to live them. After the event, they walked outside under the city lights. Jack exhaled, his breath fogging in the cool night air. "You ever think about how all this started?" he asked. Elena smiled. "Every day, and I still can't believe laughter was the seed." He laughed gently. "Guess God has a sense of humor." She nodded. "Yes, but he always makes sure the punchline heals." They walked hand in hand, streetlights reflecting like halos on wet pavement. Weeks later, the Haven received a grant from the state, enough to expand their outreach. Jack wanted to fix the roof. Elena wanted to open a reading corner for kids. They compromised and did both. Soon shelves lined the walls with books donated from all over the county. Each book carried a handwritten message inside, for those learning to believe again. Faith was no longer just preached in Willow Creek, it was printed. And every page turned sounded like hope whispering, "Still here." But amidst the joy, Elena felt something stirring deeper. A new calling. She began writing letters to women who'd been shamed, abandoned, or forgotten. Each started the same way. "You're not the rumor," they told. "You're the reason grace still speaks." The letters spread faster than she expected. Women wrote back, sharing their own stories of laughter turned into strength. Jack watched her late at night, eyes full of quiet pride. Her pain had become her pulpit. One afternoon, she found an envelope on the bakery counter. No name, just the words, "For when you feel small again." Inside was a photograph, her wedding day, captured from a new angle. She and Jack holding hands under the golden light breaking through the window. No tears, no laughter, just peace. Someone had seen the beauty even then. She smiled, whispering, "God kept the cameras of heaven rolling." Jack entered, wiping his hands on a towel. "What's that?" She showed him the photo. "Proof that God doesn't just redeem people, he redeems moments." He nodded slowly. "Then maybe we should frame it." She laughed softly. "Right next to the plaque?" He grinned. "No, next to the cross." And that's exactly where they put it, between memory and miracle. A reminder that both belong on the same wall. The following Sunday, the church was packed. Pastor Miriam spoke about faith that finishes the work it starts. She looked directly at Elena and Jack as she said, "Some prayers don't end and they multiply." After the service, a young couple approached them. "We're getting married next week," the woman said nervously. "We were scared, but your story changed that." Elena smiled. "Then make your vows brave, not perfect," Jack added, "and let grace do the editing." That evening, they returned home to find the Haven glowing softly across the street. Children's laughter still echoed faintly through the windows. Elena rested her head on Jack's shoulder. "Do you think it'll last forever?" He kissed her hair. "I don't know, but I think forever starts here." The sky turned rose gold and the church bell rang one gentle note. No longer a call to witness shame, but to celebrate restoration. Heaven had rewritten the soundtrack of Willow Creek. As they prayed that night, Elena whispered, "Lord, thank you for not stopping at forgiveness." Jack added softly, "Thank you for teaching us that love doesn't end where pain began." The rain returned, steady, patient. Like applause from heaven, it tapped against the window as if echoing their amen. Outside, the Haven stood bright, proof that grace, when planted, grows roots. Inside, two people knelt where laughter once mocked, and every tear that fell that night turned into a legacy. It was a quiet morning when the mail arrived, the kind of silence that comes before storms you don't see. Elena sorted through envelopes absently, bills, church notices, a thank you card from a nearby town. Then she froze. Her name was written in careful cursive, ink faded, postmarked from another state. The handwriting was familiar, painfully so. She ran her thumb over the corner of the envelope, heart suddenly louder than reason. It was from Jack's mother, the woman who had never forgiven her. Elena stared at it for a long time before calling Jack in from the porch. He wiped his hands on a rag, smiling. More bakery orders? She shook her head slowly, holding out the envelope. The smile vanished. For the first time in months, his eyes darkened with old guilt. She found us, he whispered. The air between them felt fragile, as if one wrong word could shatter months of peace. Jack hadn't spoken to his mother in 3 years, not since the day he left Elena at the altar the first time. Mrs. Carter had been proud, cold, and convinced her son deserved someone more suitable. She'd humiliated Elena publicly, calling her the charity case with a good face. And when Jack disappeared, she'd sent a letter saying it was for the best. Now her words had returned, perhaps changed, perhaps not. Elena placed the envelope on the table, trembling. Do you want to open it? Jack hesitated. Not alone. They sat side by side, hands barely touching. Jack tore the envelope carefully, as if mercy depended on how gentle he was. The letter inside was long, written in elegant, practiced handwriting. He began to read aloud, voice low and uneven. Jack, I heard about the Haven. I saw the article. I'm ashamed. His breath caught. His fingers trembled. Those 2 words, I'm ashamed, were ones he'd waited his whole life to hear. The letter continued. I judged her. I judged you. And in doing so, I lost more than a daughter-in-law. I lost the chance to know Grace. Elena covered her mouth, eyes welling. I've been sick, it read, and thinking of all the things I can't take back. If forgiveness is still something you preach, perhaps there's still time for me to learn it. The last line was simple. Please come home. Bring her if she'll come. Jack looked at Elena, voice cracking. What do we do? The question hung heavy, full of history and hesitation. Elena's mind flashed with memories, the cruel whispers, the humiliation, the ache of being called unworthy. Every wound she thought had healed began to throb again. She wanted to say no, to protect the peace she had finally found. But something deeper spoke through her heart. If she's asking for grace, Elena whispered, then maybe this is what we built the Haven for. Jack's eyes filled with tears. You'd really go? She nodded. Grace doesn't travel halfway. For the next 2 days, they prayed and packed small bags. The town, hearing of their trip, gathered to send them off. Mrs. Talbot hugged Elena tightly. You're braver than I've ever been, she whispered. The teenager from the wedding handed her a drawing of the Haven with the words, Don't forget where Grace began. Elena smiled through tears. Sometimes the hardest journeys are just homecomings in disguise. The drive to the neighboring state was quiet but heavy. Fields stretched endlessly, and rain began to tap against the windshield. Jack kept his eyes on the road, jaw tense. She'll try to apologize, he murmured, but words might not be enough. Elena turned to him, her voice steady. Then let's show her something better, forgiveness that doesn't need to win. He glanced at her, half in awe, half in fear. How do you keep loving like that, he asked. By remembering who loved me first, she said. When they arrived, the house looked smaller than Jack remembered. Time has a way of humbling walls. He hesitated on the porch, staring at the door he'd once slammed behind him. Elena slipped her hand into his. Let's knock together. The door opened before they could, and there she was. Older, thinner oxygen tube at her nose, but her eyes were the same piercing blue. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Mrs. Carter whispered, I didn't think you'd come. Jack's voice cracked. Neither did I. Elena stood quietly, unsure if she was welcome or tolerated. But then Mrs. Carter's gaze shifted to her, softening, breaking. I owe you an apology, she said. 1,000 of them, actually. Elena's throat tightened. You don't owe me anything. Yes, the woman said, trembling. I do, because you loved my son better than I ever taught him to love anyone. The room fell silent, and for the first time, shame turned into confession. Mrs. Carter reached for Elena's hand, her grip frail but real. I read about the bakery, the center. You turned pain into purpose. Elena blinked back tears. It wasn't me. It was Grace, the older woman smiled weakly. Grace, that word you used to talk about when I laughed. Her eyes filled. Now I think I finally understand it. Jack looked away, his own tears falling freely. Healing, it seemed, had found its final patient. They spent the afternoon talking about mistakes, second chances, and the God who gives both. Mrs. Carter asked questions no one else had dared to. What did it feel like that day, Con, when everyone laughed? Elena hesitated, like dying, but slower. But I think something divine happens when humiliation meets humility. It turns pain into testimony. The woman nodded slowly, closing her eyes as if tasting peace for the first time. Then thank you, she whispered, for letting me see it before I go. Night fell quietly over the small house. Mrs. Carter fell asleep in her chair, hand still wrapped around Elena's. Jack covered her with a blanket and stepped outside, exhaling into the cool air. He looked at the stars, his voice breaking. God, you really don't forget a single soul, do you? Elena joined him, leaning her head against his shoulder. She forgave herself tonight, she murmured. He nodded. And somehow that healed a part of me too. The next morning, they found the letter. Not the one that brought them there, but a new one, written overnight. Mrs. Carter had passed away in her sleep, peace soft on her face. Jack read the note aloud, tears falling onto the page. Don't cry. I'm going where Grace started, the same place it found you. Inside the folded paper was an old photograph, their wedding day. On the back she had written, laughter can hurt, but Grace remembers the sound differently. Elena's sob turned into a whisper. She made it home. They buried her under a willow tree near the churchyard she once refused to enter. The townspeople gathered quietly, no judgment this time, only reverence. Pastor Miriam spoke the final words. Sometimes forgiveness finishes the prayers others started. Jack held Elena's hand tightly, his grief deep but clean. He didn't just lose a mother that day. He gained understanding, and as they walked away he whispered, she's part of the story now. Elena nodded. She always was. We just couldn't see it yet. Back in Willow Creek, the church bell rang as they arrived home. The haven glowed warmly through the mist as if it had been waiting for them. Inside, volunteers had lit candles by the front window, one for every person Grace had reached. Elena stood silently, overwhelmed. Jack placed Mrs. Carter's photograph next to the cross on the wall. This belongs here, he said softly, because even late repentance deserves a place among miracles. That night, Elena wrote her own letter, one she never planned to send. Dear Grace, she began, you took my shame and turned it into sanctuary. You let me see that love doesn't erase pain, it repurposes it. She folded the letter and placed it inside her Bible. Maybe one day, she whispered, someone else will need these words. Jack watched quietly from the doorway, smiling. You're still preaching without a pulpit, he said. Good, she replied, because hearts make better altars. The next morning she woke early and stepped outside barefoot, the earth cool beneath her feet. Dawn painted the horizon in soft pinks and golds. She looked toward the church bell, then at the haven and whispered, thank you. Not for the blessings, but for the bruises that taught her how to see them. Every storm, every rumor, every tear, and all had led here. Behind her, Jack wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. Cold? He asked. No, she said, smiling. Covered. Later that week, she hung a new sign on the wall inside the haven. Grace doesn't forget anyone. Children asked her what it meant. She bent down, smiling. It means God finishes what people abandon. The kids nodded as if it made perfect sense. And maybe in their world it did, because they'd grown up watching Grace with their own eyes. That night, as the candles flickered in the haven, Elena and Jack prayed once more. No grand words, no requests, just gratitude. For every laugh that turned into worship, Jack whispered. For every scar that became scripture, Elena added. The rain began again, soft, familiar, holy. And somewhere above it all, heaven kept turning pages. Because stories like theirs don't end, they echo. Winter came quietly that year, brushing the roofs of Willow Creek with silver calm. Inside the haven, the smell of bread and pine needles filled the air. Elena stood by the window watching children decorate paper angels for Christmas. Each little hand carried a piece of the story, of laughter redeemed, of love rebuilt. Jack was fixing the lights again, pretending not to hum along with the carols. Everything looked ordinary, almost too ordinary. And that's when God usually surprises you. A letter arrived that morning, this time addressed to both of them. It came from a town 2 states away. Elena opened it, expecting another thank you note. Instead, her eyes widened. Jack, they're asking for help. He took the paper, brow furrowing as he read aloud. We heard about the Haven. Could you show us how to build one here? They looked at each other, disbelief mixing with awe. The town was called Millstone, smaller, poorer, a place long forgotten by headlines and hope. A local pastor had seen their story in the paper and prayed, "Lord, if they can turn shame into grace, maybe we can too." The letter ended simply, "If you come, we'll follow your lead." Elena pressed the paper to her chest, overwhelmed. "This is bigger than us, Jack," she whispered. He nodded slowly. Maybe grace was never meant to stay in one place. And just like that, destiny knocked again. They packed light, some bread recipes, a few photos, and the faith that built a town. The community gathered to pray over them before they left. Pastor Miriam's voice trembled. "The first Haven changed Willow Creek, the next one will change the world." Tears filled the room, not of goodbye, but of sending forth. Even the children lined up at the door, handing them paper angels for blessings. Elena tucked one into her coat pocket. "Every story of grace," she whispered, "deserves a sequel." Millstone was gray when they arrived. No laughter, no warmth, just wind carrying the scent of resignation. The old church stood cracked and empty, the pews covered in dust. Jack ran his hand over the pulpit, splinters catching his palm. "This place doesn't need repairs," he said softly. "It needs resurrection." Elena smiled faintly. "Then we've come to the right grave." They prayed right there, no music, no lights, just whispers echoing through broken windows. And somehow the air shifted. Within a week, word spread that something was happening at the old church. Curious townspeople stopped by, first out of skepticism, then out of hunger for something real. Elena started baking again, handing out warm rolls with words like "You matter" written on napkins. Jack repaired chairs, roofs, and eventually hearts. Children began coming after school, painting walls the color of sunrise. No one called it the Haven yet, but it already felt holy. And hope started sounding like hammer strikes and laughter again. One afternoon, as they finished sweeping the floors, a man entered carrying a newspaper. "You're on the front page," he said, smiling. Elena took the paper, her hands trembling as she read the headline. "Grace moves again. The second Haven begins." She looked at Jack, eyes wide. "It's happening," he grinned. "And this time no one's laughing. But heaven was, and the joyful kind." Donations began arriving from neighboring towns, wood, flour, paint, even school books. Letters poured in, written by strangers who'd once watched their story online. Some said, "I stopped believing in love until I saw what you two built." Others wrote, "I forgave my father after watching your story." Elena wept, reading each one. She turned to Jack. "We thought God healed us for our sake, but maybe he healed us for theirs." Jack nodded. Redemption travels better than rumors. As spring approached, the new Haven was almost finished. The mayor of Millstone declared the opening day a local holiday, Grace Day. When the ribbon was cut, the crowd erupted in applause. Among them stood a young woman clutching her child, tears streaming down her face. She whispered to Elena, "Your story saved mine. I was going to give up, but I saw your video." Elena hugged her tightly. "Then keep walking. Grace always waits one step ahead." Behind them, Jack quietly wiped his eyes. That evening, as the sun set behind the church, Elena sat alone on the steps, exhausted but full. A soft wind brushed against her hair. She closed her eyes and heard it. Faint, distant but unmistakable. The bell of St. Augustine ringing back in Willow Creek, miles away yet perfectly in sync. Jack stepped out beside her, smiling. "You hear it too?" She nodded. Grace echoes. They returned home weeks later to find Willow Creek waiting for them with banners, candles, and tears. Someone had painted on the Haven's wall, "Where love begins, it continues." Children ran to them, shouting, "The bell rang the day you opened the new one." Elena's heart swelled. Heaven keeps time better than we do. Pastor Miriam hugged them both tightly. "You see?" The laughter didn't end the story, and it started the revival. Jack smiled, eyes glistening. And Grace turned out contagious. The whole town laughed, the healed kind of laughter. Months passed, and soon the Haven network became real. Volunteers, letters, and satellite centers across the country. Each one different in name, but united in spirit. The bakery walls filled with photos from every town touched by their testimony. Jack would often walk in, stare at them all, and whisper, "This is what mercy builds." Elena kept writing letters, Not to teach, but to remind. And everyone began the same. We once were the story everyone pitied. Now we are the story God still writes. The ending, it seemed, refused to end. One morning, she found a message waiting on her desk, an email from overseas. It was from a missionary in Uganda who had stumbled upon their story. He wrote, "We've built a bakery here too. We call it Haven Bread. It feeds the hungry and teaches forgiveness." Elena covered her mouth, tears spilling freely. "Jack," she whispered. It reached across oceans. He came running, reading the message with trembling hands. And together they laughed, that holy, disbelieving kind of laughter. That Sunday, Pastor Miriam invited them to speak at church. Elena stood at the pulpit looking out at familiar faces, faces that once mocked, now moved. "We thought God saved our marriage," she said. "But he was really saving our town." Her voice broke, but she continued. "And through this town, he's saving others." Jack joined her, placing his hand over hers. "Every tear has a mission," he said softly. "Don't waste yours." The congregation rose in applause that sounded like worship. After the service, a little girl tugged on Elena's dress. "Miss Elena," she said shyly, "my mama says when we laugh now, God laughs too." Elena knelt down, smiling. "Your mama's right." The child thought for a moment. "Then maybe heaven's full of laughter now." Jack chuckled. "I think it is." The girl ran off giggling, her voice echoing down the aisle. And just like that, joy became the new sound of Willow Creek. That night, Jack lit candles by the window and opened his old Bible. Inside was the first letter Elena had ever written him after he left her. He hadn't read it in years. It said, "If you ever come back different. Come back with grace." He smiled, tears blurring the ink. "Guess I did, huh?" he whispered. They sat together in silence, the kind only peace can afford. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees. Jack whispered, "Do you ever miss who we were?" Elena shook her head. "No, because who we were is what taught us how to love like this." He smiled. "Then maybe the old us didn't die, maybe they became our testimony." She nodded. "And testimonies never fade." The rain started to fall again, gentle as mercy. Weeks later, they received one final envelope. No stamp, no return address, just the words, "For the haven that started it all." Inside was a simple gold bell pendant and a note. "When the world forgets, ring this. Heaven will answer." Elena held it tightly, feeling its weight, small but eternal. Jack hung it near the door of the haven. Every time it rang, they smiled, because heaven had learned to answer with echoes. Years would pass, seasons would change, but the story never stopped. New faces carried the same faith, the same laughter that once wounded. Elena grew older, her hair silvering, her smile deeper. Jack still fixed things, doors, fences, hearts. Sometimes they'd walk past the church and hear the bell ring softly on its own. No one ever found out who started it, but they knew who finished it. On their 20th anniversary, the town gathered outside the haven. Candles flickered, children sang, and the bell rang one final time for the night. Elena took Jack's hand, whispering, "Remember when they laughed?" He nodded, eyes shining. "Now they're singing," she smiled. "And that's the sound of redemption." The camera of heaven pulled back, light spilling over the town like grace itself. And in that glow, their tears became testimony once more. Time moved gently through Willow Creek, like a hymn sung slower with every year. The bakery's paint had faded, but its warmth never did. Children who once came for cookies now brought their own. Elena's hair had turned silver, but her eyes still carried that quiet fire, the kind only grace can light. Jack's hands, worn and scarred, still fixed everything he could touch. People said they'd built a ministry, but really they'd built a rhythm. Love made visible. On a spring morning, Jack stood by the window repairing the old bell rope. It frayed every few years, and he insisted on fixing it himself. Elena watched from her chair, smiling. "You realize if that bell ever stops ringing, heaven might panic." He laughed softly. "Then I'll keep fixing it until I can't." The sound of his voice still calmed her, like the echo of a prayer answered long ago. "Promise me," she said, "you'll never stop teaching them why we built this." He turned, eyes glistening. "That's one promise I'll keep." They began mentoring young couples at the haven, not with books but with scars. Jack taught about patience with calloused hands. Elena taught about forgiveness with trembling ones. People came from nearby towns, drawn by stories that didn't sound rehearsed. Real faith, she'd tell them, doesn't glow in perfection. It glows in perseverance. Jack added, and sometimes the miracle isn't that it works out. It's that you stay when it doesn't. The couples would nod, tears falling softly between smiles. They were learning what love looked like after the credits rolled. One afternoon, Elena found a group of teenagers huddled over a phone in the bakery. She smiled. Watching something good, I hope. They turned the screen toward her. It was her story, uploaded years ago now with millions of views. The comments scrolled endlessly. I found God again because of this. Her eyes filled, voice trembling. All that laughter, all that pain. Jack appeared behind her, reading the words. Looks like heaven made sure the world didn't forget. That evening, they walked through the garden behind the haven. The lilacs had bloomed early and the air smelled like home. Jack held her hand carefully, mindful of her slower steps. I keep thinking, she said, if our pain helped others find peace, then it was worth it. He nodded, eyes misty. Every heartbreak was a seed. Elena smiled softly. Then grace is the rain. And the wind carried their laughter into the trees, light as a prayer, lasting as love. As the years deepened, Elena began writing again, her final book, When God Rewrites Laughter. Each chapter was a piece of their journey, the wedding, the rumors, the haven, the legacy. She didn't seek fame, just remembrance. One night, Jack found her asleep at the desk, pen still in hand. He covered her shoulders with a blanket and whispered, "You turned tears into theology." She stirred, smiling even in sleep. "No," she murmured. "I just wrote what Grace told me." He kissed her forehead. "Then it's already perfect." When the book was published, it reached hearts far beyond their town. Letters poured in again, not for help this time, but for gratitude. Readers wrote, "Your story became my mirror." One man confessed he read it in prison and started a prayer group called The Haven Within. Elena cried reading that one. Jack held her close. "See? Grace multiplies faster than guilt." And she whispered, "Then let it keep multiplying." But one winter, Jack's health began to fade. He moved slower, worked less, and coughed more. Elena watched quietly, never asking how bad it was. Love learns to listen between breaths. He still tried to fix everything he could, except himself. One night he smiled weakly. "If I go first, make sure the bell still rings." Her tears came without sound. "You're not leaving yet." He squeezed her hand. "Just preparing the echo." The next weeks felt sacred. They sat on the porch, talking more about heaven than the weather. Jack told her he wasn't afraid, just curious. "What do you think Grace looks like up close?" he asked. Elena smiled through tears. "Probably like the moment you stopped running." He laughed softly, his favorite sound in the world. And in that laughter, eternity peeked through. One morning, she woke to silence, too still, too complete. Jack's chair was empty, the coffee untouched. She found him in the garden, lying peacefully among the lilacs. His hand still clutched a note. She unfolded it, heart trembling. "When the bell rings, don't cry. It's just me fixing it from the other side." She pressed the paper to her heart, whispering, "You kept your promise." And then, as if on cue, the church bell rang once. The town gathered that day, candles in hand, grief in their eyes. Elena stood at the door of the haven, her hands steady despite the shaking inside. "This isn't an ending," she said softly. "It's a continuation, just in another chapter." People nodded, tears streaming freely. Even the children stood still, holding hands like prayer chains. When the bell rang again, no one mourned. They worshipped. Because in Willow Creek, even loss had learned to sound like grace. Weeks later, she planted a tree in the garden where he rested, a sycamore like the one from their childhood. She tied a ribbon to its trunk that read, "Love doesn't die, it multiplies." The first bloom appeared sooner than expected. She smiled, whispering, "You're still fixing things, aren't you?" Wind brushed through the branches like laughter reborn. For a moment she felt him there, not gone, just rearranged. Years passed again, slower this time, but still kind. Elena became the storyteller of Willow Creek, the living testimony. Young couples came just to hear her voice and the way she spoke about forgiveness like a familiar friend. The secret, she'd say, isn't forgetting. It's remembering with peace. When she laughed, the sound still carried Jack's tone within it. Grace, after all, has an accent, and theirs spoke fluent redemption. One rainy afternoon, she returned to the haven alone. Dust danced in the golden light coming through the windows. She walked slowly to the wall of photographs, faces, places, miracles. Her fingers brushed each frame like a blessing. At the very end of the row hung one empty space. She smiled knowingly and whispered, "Soon." Because even farewells can be rehearsed with peace. That night she dreamt of the haven full of light, Jack by the door, calling her name. No sorrow, no fear, only warmth. "Ready?" he asked, smiling like the day everything began. She laughed softly. "It took you long enough to fix heaven's door." He held out his hand. "I was waiting for you." And when she took it, the dream felt more like memory. The bell rang faintly in the distance. Days later, the town awoke to the bell ringing with no wind, no hands, no reason. The sound rolled through the streets like sunlight breaking through years of quiet. People ran to the haven and found Elena resting peacefully at her writing desk. Her Bible was open to Psalm 126. "Those who sow in tears will reap with songs of joy." Beside it, a note in her handwriting, "Tell them I heard the laughter." And in that moment, the town understood. Love had completed its circle. They buried her next to Jack, under the same sycamore tree she'd planted. The children tied ribbons of every color to its branches, calling it the Tree of Second Chances. The mayor ordered the bell to ring 7 times, one for each chapter of their story. Each toll sounded softer, purer, more eternal. People wept, but they smiled through the tears. Because it didn't feel like death, it felt like continuation. And heaven, surely, was listening. Years later, Willow Creek remained changed. New couples ran the haven, new children filled the classrooms. But the bell still rang, sometimes on its own. Visitors would ask, "Who rings it?" The locals would smile. They do, the ones who started it. And every time it echoed, hearts softened again. Because faith never dies. It just moves addresses. One evening, Pastor Miriam, now gray and gentle, stood at the window watching the sunset. She whispered, "They did it. They really turned laughter into legacy." Behind her, the new generation of leaders worked tirelessly, their laughter pure and fearless. Grace had become their inheritance. And somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled like applause. Miriam smiled. Heaven's still clapping. And she closed her eyes in gratitude. At dusk, the bell rang once more, clear, warm, eternal. Its sound crossed meadows, towns, and hearts, just like it always had. And those who heard it paused, knowing it meant something sacred. Because that's what grace does, and it doesn't fade, it echoes. Somewhere beyond clouds and time, Elena and Jack walked together again. No laughter, no pain, only music made of mercy. And heaven whispered, "Well done." Years passed like gentle hymns carried by wind through Willow Creek. The town grew, yet somehow never lost its smallness, its soul. Children played where tears once fell, and laughter filled the same air that once judged. The haven still stood strong, its bricks aged, but its spirit young. Inside, the golden bell hung by the door, glinting softly in morning light. Each ring sounded like memory speaking in present tense, and every sound was a heartbeat of grace that refused to die. New faces filled the bakery now, but Elena and Jack's presence lingered. Their portraits hung near the counter, her warm smile, his gentle eyes. Tourists came to see them, but locals came to feel them. They'd whisper, "You can still sense love here." And somehow, they were right. The air carried forgiveness like fragrance. The bell above the door chimed, though no one touched it. Perhaps heaven liked to keep the rhythm going. Every year on the day they first wed, the town gathered at the Haven. Not to mourn, but to remember the laughter that became light. Candles lined the windows, each flame representing a redeemed story. People shared testimonies not of perfection but perseverance. Pastor Miriam would smile and say, "They stayed, and so must we." Then the bell would ring once more, as if answering her faith. The sound always brought tears, the holy kind. Far beyond Willow Creek, the legacy of the Haven spread. Letters arrived from places Elena never dreamed of: Brazil, Kenya, Ireland. Each one told a similar tale. Bread shared, hearts healed, laughter redeemed. A network of light grew across oceans without a name or leader. Just people who believed grace should move, not sit still. One church wrote, "We built one too. It smells like hope and forgiveness." And for heaven, that was the sweetest perfume. In the heart of town, a young woman named Sarah now led the Haven. She'd been a child when Elena passed. Now she carried their mission. Every morning she'd light 2 candles by the window, one for them, one for Grace. She never met them, yet she felt like she had. Their story wasn't just told, it was lived again through her kindness. When visitors asked how it all began, she'd smile softly. It started with laughter, and God's refusal to let it end that way. One afternoon, Sarah found an envelope tucked inside an old cookbook. The handwriting was shaky but familiar, Elena's. It read, "For whoever continues this story, don't chase results. Chase love." Tears blurred the ink before she finished. She pressed the note to her heart, whispering, "I will." And from the rafters above, the bell rang softly, almost like a celestial amen. Years kept weaving their quiet threads through Willow Creek. Children grew into dreamers, dreamers into builders, and builders into believers. The Haven became more than a place. It was a pulse that traveled. Each loaf of bread told a sermon without words. Each act of kindness rewrote the history of the town, and those who once mocked the name Haven now whispered it like prayer, because even rumors bow to redemption. On a stormy night, the power went out across town. Darkness fell heavy, but no one panicked. Sarah lit a single candle inside the Haven, placing it by the window. Within minutes, lights appeared in every home, one flame at a time. The whole street glowed like heaven's handwriting. Outside, thunder rolled softly, as if applauding the light, and the bell rang once, echoing through the storm. The next morning, townspeople gathered, still speaking in hushed awe. Children drew pictures of candles and bells, calling it the Night of Grace. Local papers ran the story. "When heaven borrowed the power lines," Sarah smiled reading it, knowing Elena would have laughed at the headline. She placed the article on the counter next to their photo. The sunlight reflected perfectly across both pages, and the bell above the door chimed in approval. Time softened everything except the story. It was told in schools, whispered in prayers, sung in small-town choirs. The lesson was always the same. Love outlasts laughter when God rewrites it. Some called it a miracle, others called it memory. But Sarah knew better. It was obedience made visible. When she prayed at night, she'd say, "Let me echo what they began." And heaven always answered with peace. One day, a weary traveler entered the Haven, soaked by rain. He carried a look of loss that words couldn't translate. Sarah handed him a towel, a warm slice of bread, and silence. After a while, he whispered, "I don't believe in second chances." She smiled gently. "Then stay until you do." When he left hours later, he turned back to say, "The bell rang when I walked out." Sarah whispered to herself, "It always does." Months later, she started a journal titled Echoes of Grace. Each page held stories of miracles too quiet for headlines. A widow forgiving her sister. A son returning home after years of anger. A little girl saying she wanted to be a light that listens. Sarah realized the haven wasn't growing. It was multiplying. Grace, like music, doesn't stop. It just finds new instruments. The first haven outside America opened in Ireland, built from an old pub. Locals said the air inside smelled like coffee, candles, and resurrection. On its wall, a quote painted in gold, "Forgive faster than you understand." No one knew who wrote it. But heaven did. And every Sunday, as worship filled the air, the church bell chimed twice. One for their story, and one for everyone still living it. Back in Willow Creek, Sarah received a video message from that Irish haven. Dozens of people singing, holding candles, shouting "thank you" across oceans. She played it on the bakery's old screen while the town gathered. As the final note faded, the bell above them rang once, clear and golden. The room went silent, hearts trembling with awe. Sarah smiled through tears. Guess they heard it up there. And somewhere beyond clouds, laughter answered. The following spring, a new plaque was added to the haven's wall. It read, "Founded by grace, sustained by echoes." Visitors came from everywhere just to touch it. They'd close their eyes and somehow peace would fall on them. Because it wasn't just a building anymore, it was living scripture. The wind outside carried whispers of their names: Elena, Jack. 2 syllables, 1 testimony. One rainy afternoon, Sarah sat alone at the counter listening to the storm. She opened her Bible and found a note tucked in its pages. It was old, fragile, but legible. "If anyone reads this, tell them grace continues." She looked up, eyes shimmering. "It still does," she whispered. Outside, thunder rolled like a slow amen, and then, that gentle, unmistakable chime. The bell sang once more, as if agreeing. The town began to call it the eternal sound. Some said it rang with angel's breath. Others said it was memory's echo. But everyone felt the same peace when it did. Even strangers passing through stopped to listen, unaware of why they cried. Because divine echoes reach the heart before the mind. The haven became a place where time stood reverent. And grace once again took attendance. Every autumn, when the leaves turned gold, children reenacted the story. They'd wear veils, bake bread, and ring little bells in laughter. Parents watched, tears glimmering, knowing what that joy cost to exist. It wasn't nostalgia, it was inheritance. No one left those gatherings untouched. Even silence felt sacred there. Because in Willow Creek, heaven was always close enough to hear. On the 50th anniversary of their wedding, the bell rang louder than ever. It echoed through mountains, across rivers, over miles of memory. People said it sounded like 2 voices singing together again. Sarah stood at the door, hand over her heart. "Thank you," she whispered to the sky. The rain began softly, falling like applause. And heaven once more turned tears into melody. As night settled over Willow Creek, the lights of the haven glowed like stars. The bell above the door swayed gently, though no wind blew. Inside, Sarah whispered a final prayer. May grace never grow quiet. The sound that followed was soft, endless, holy. It wasn't noise. It was legacy. Because Elena and Jack had proven what love can do when it listens. And from that night on, the echo of grace never stopped. The bell of Willow Creek still rings, not just in the air, but in the hearts of those who choose to forgive when it makes no sense, and love when it costs everything. People still walk into the haven every day, not looking for bread, but for belonging. And though Elena and Jack are gone, their story lives in every act of mercy, every second chance whispered between 2 trembling hearts. Because grace never dies, it multiplies. It crosses generations, oceans, and wounds. It reaches the one who thinks they're too late, and softly says, "You're right on time." If you listen closely, you can still hear it. Not the laughter of mockery, but the laughter of redemption. The kind that sounds like healing, like rain after drought, like peace learning to sing again. And somewhere beyond time, in a place where love never ends, Elena turns to Jack and smiles. See? The laughter didn't break us. It built eternity. He answers gently, and the bell still rings. Maybe you've been through moments that broke you, when others laughed, when the pain felt louder than your faith. But the same God who turned Elena's tears into a testimony can do the same for you. Don't give up in the middle of your story, Bob, because redemption always rings again.